Now is a great time to start a new podcast. It's a great time to start a video podcast with YouTube pushing shorts and discoverability on their platform, continuing to do an audio podcast where you can get a large audience and sponsors. But there are some bad habits you should definitely avoid if you're going to start a new podcast, or even if you've been podcasting for years. Here are 8 things to try and avoid as you create your podcast content this year. Number 1, stop doing broad podcast topics. If you're starting a new podcast and the description is we talk about anything and everything, maybe rethink your angle. Rather than doing something so broad and general that the topic is anything and everything, find your niche. You'll actually be able to grow your audience faster and find those passionate listeners and viewers when you're talking about a specific topic. So rather than just doing a movie review podcast, maybe really drill down into a specific genre, or just Marvel movies or DC movies. DC might be a little tough, but that's up to you. Rather than just doing a sports commentary podcast, maybe find a high school basketball team and tell passionate stories about the players from that specific school. So no more podcasts about anything and everything. Find your niche. Number 2, it's time to stop the small talk at the beginning of your podcast episodes. I know it can be enjoyable and fun to feel like you're warming up with your co-hosts and guests and just shooting the breeze before you get to the actual content. But because there are so many podcasts out there right now, listeners and viewers will actually tune out and not listen to your show if you don't get to the content you advertised in your title description or even in your podcast artwork. There's actually great analytics right now from Apple Podcasts and Spotify that shows the retention rate for your podcast episodes. And as you can see, much like YouTube, even your listeners for the audio version of your podcast will slowly drop off the longer the episode goes. So it's important to put your best content up at the front. Maybe put a teaser from your interview, a really engaging line at the very beginning. Cut out all the small talk and get right to the content that what your podcast is about. And if you'd like to learn more about interpreting your analytics for the podcast, check out this video above. It's also in the description. Speaking of analytics, number 3 is we need to stop ignoring the metrics for our podcast. For a long time, especially if you just did audio podcasts, the download number was the only metric we ever looked at. But now there are lots of metrics that can show you what podcast titles actually cause someone to click. How does SEO play into my title and description for my podcast episodes? And if you're doing a video podcast and publishing it to YouTube, titles and descriptions and tags really matter. So we can't just look at download numbers anymore. Pay attention to the number of people following your episode versus listening versus engaged listeners, those who stick with your entire episode. See what episode titles actually generate more listens and views. What topics actually matter to your audience. We need to pay attention to all the metrics, not just downloads. Number 4, and I've been guilty of this too, we need to stop listing so many calls to actions at the end of our podcast episode. I know it can be tempting. You want your audience to do all the things. Follow you on Instagram and TikTok, support you on Patreon, rate and review you in Apple Podcasts and Spotify. But even as I was saying that just now, you probably started tuning out because you've heard those calls to actions all the time. And your listeners, if you put those call to actions the same way every time at the end of your episode, they're going to tune out as well and probably not do any of them. So don't list a bunch of calls to action at the end. Follow, support, all that. Choose one thing in an episode and place that call to action somewhere you don't typically expect it. Maybe you do it at the beginning or in the middle, and do it in a way that's fun and engaging and different than just saying, support us on Patreon or an Apple Podcasts. Maybe you have a fun question for your audience, like, which is your favorite Marvel movie? Tell them, give us a 5-star rating and review in Apple Podcasts, and if you're not sure what to write, just put your favorite Marvel movie right there in the title. That's all you need to do. That'll help your show because you're getting a rating and review with a comment, and your listeners know what to do. They don't have to think of something to say. You've given them the content. Number 5, this is also something I'm guilty of. We need to stop using the wrong terminology when it comes to podcasts. Certain terms have changed over the last 5 years, things like subscribing and following, and we need to make sure that we're saying it right so our listeners, when they actually do what we're asking them, they see the word they expect. For instance, in Apple Podcasts, you used to subscribe to a show. Well, that's not the case anymore. You actually follow a show. There's a big follow button up at the top. So if you want someone to continue to get episodes and get notified when you release a new episode, tell them to follow your show in Apple Podcasts. But if you want them to support your show, like pay a monthly fee for bonus content or an ad-free version of the show, that term is actually subscribe. So following the show is free. That's how they get notified of new episodes and get those auto downloads. But if they want to support your show and pay monthly for bonus content, that's saying subscribe to the show. Also, don't say iTunes. iTunes is not a thing anymore, so don't say it. Number 6, we need to stop measuring our value as podcast creators from just the download number. It can be difficult, especially when you're starting a new show or trying to grow a show. If you get a few hundred downloads per episode, you know that is far fewer than what the big shows get, like tens or even hundreds of thousands of downloads. But that's not the only metric that matters when you're a podcast creator. How engaged is your audience? Are they leaving comments? Do they support you on Patreon and other member sites? the downloads number is not the only number to measure the success of your show. Also, consider this. If you only have 200 downloads per episode, that might sound small to you, or maybe it sounds big because you're just starting out. Imagine if you were standing in a room and speaking to 200 people. 200 people were standing there listening to every word you say. That's what 200 downloads might look like from a podcast. So don't measure your value or the quality of your show just by the downloads number. And if you're looking for ways to grow your show, maybe consider adding video and sharing clips to TikTok and Reels. Many times clips can go viral and get lots of views and helps expose your podcast and grow that audience. If you'd like to learn more about creating vertical videos easily, especially with Riverside, check out this video above. The link is also in the description. Number 7, we need to stop forgetting to promote our show. For many podcast creators, after you record and edit, you're doing that whole process yourself, you lose steam in the promotion side. So you've got the episode up, it's public, everyone can listen or watch, but you don't have the last bit of energy to actually promote it. You have to promote your show because that's the only way to get the word out, and you are the most passionate person about your podcast. So post about it on social media, share those vertical clips to TikTok and Reels, upload the full video to YouTube. Start building an email list where you can send new episodes and notify listeners and viewers via email. We actually have a whole video that helps you automate your promoting process and publishing your podcast. You can check out that video above. There's great tools for auto-posting new episodes to social media, even with custom artwork, to help lighten that load of promoting the show. I know it can be tough, but save some of that steam, save some of that energy for promoting your show so you can help the audience that would love your content find your show. And finally, number 8, we need to stop uploading poor quality video and audio. There's no excuse because you can use Riverside to record high quality video and audio, and Riverside makes it super easy to post that high quality video and audio wherever you want to host your podcast. You can download uncompressed WAV files for every guest, your co-hosts, and edit that high quality audio to publish it to your podcast host. If you need to find a good podcast host, we actually have a great video on that too. But you can also record high quality video with all of your guests, and the Riverside editor makes it easy to put your videos side by side, full length. You can even cut segments out of your recording now in the Riverside editor. You don't even need to export those video files to a third-party editor. You can cut out those clips. Maybe someone had to get up or there was an interruption. Cut out those clips, export up to 4K video, and it's ready to upload to YouTube right from the Riverside editor. If you'd like to learn more about using Riverside for your podcast creation, check out this playlist above. And we also have lots of content on the YouTube channel about building a video podcast setup, recommendations for USB microphones, and a ton more. So subscribe to the Riverside YouTube channel, hit this like button, and if you're launching a new podcast this year, drop a comment below with a link to the show. We'd love to check it out and maybe even promote it on our social media. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you in the next video.